The rain fell in heavy sheets, the sound of raindrops against the pavement creating a soothing rhythm. Emma Sanders stepped into the cozy cafe, shaking off her umbrella and feeling a small wave of relief as she escaped the downpour. She was a financial consultant in her late 20s, a woman whose life revolved around spreadsheets, numbers, and deadlines. Today, though she was craving something different, peace. The cafe was a refuge from the hustle of her busy life. The warm, earthy tones of the place, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and the hum of quiet conversations made it the perfect place to unwind. Emma loved coming here whenever she needed a break from the fast pace of work, and today was no exception. She took a seat by the window, pulling out her laptop to get some work done. As she settled into her routine, her mind wandered. The past week had been a blur of meetings and presentations, and she was ready for a break, even if it was just for an hour or two. As she opened her laptop and began to review her emails, a man walked in. He was tall, with dark hair, and dressed in a sleek black coat that looked expensive. He shook the rain from his umbrella and looked around for a place to sit. Emma glanced up briefly, not really paying attention, until she noticed something that caught her off guard. His presence. There was an undeniable magnetism about him. He moved through the room with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going. His gaze was steady, purposeful. He wasn't like the usual patrons who came in for a quick coffee. No, this man commanded the space without even trying. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, at the counter in a low, calm voice that carried a quiet authority. When he turned around, his eyes briefly met Emma's. It was a moment of recognition, nothing overt, just a fleeting connection, but something about it made her heart skip a beat. She quickly looked back at her laptop, brushing off the odd feeling. Not a good time for distractions, she told herself. The man took his coffee and chose a table near hers. He didn't sit right across from her, but his presence was still undeniable. There was a quiet intensity about him. Emma couldn't help but glance up every so often, trying not to stare, but she felt his eyes on her now and then, as if he was aware of her watching him. A few minutes later, rainy day, huh? His voice broke the silence, and Emma looked up to see the man standing at her table, his dark eyes steady and calm. As if the conversation had been waiting to happen, she blinked in surprise. Yeah, it's been coming down for a while. It looks like it's not letting up anytime soon, she replied, offering a polite smile, but unsure of how to proceed. He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth turning up just slightly. I kind of like it. Sometimes the rain makes everything slow down. People stop rushing for a bit. Emma chuckled, feeling a bit more at ease. I guess I can see that. It gives you a chance to... think. Exactly, he said, taking a sip from his coffee. You can't always think straight when you're running around, doing everything in a hurry. You miss the small stuff. Emma looked at him more closely. There was something about his demeanor that felt different from everyone else. He didn't seem in a rush, didn't seem to need to be anywhere. She wondered if he was just passing through or if he lived in the area. And what about you? She asked, curious now. Do you find yourself slowing down, too? The man's gaze softened for a moment, and for the first time, she saw a hint of something more personal in his eyes. I think I've been doing a lot of running lately. The rain. It's nice to just stop for a minute. There was something in his tone, something she couldn't quite place, that intrigued her. He wasn't just another stranger in a cafe. There was a depth to him that made her want to know more. But she stopped herself. You're here to relax, not get caught up in some stranger's story. she reminded herself. Still, she couldn't ignore the strange sense of connection she felt. Even though they had barely said anything to each other, the brief exchange felt more meaningful than she expected. He stood up to leave after a few moments of silence. He stood up to leave, his coffee finished. He didn't say goodbye, but as he turned to walk out the door, he glanced back at her, his eyes locking with hers once more. "Take care," he said, almost casually. But there was something in his voice, something that lingered after he was gone. Emma sat there for a few seconds, staring at the door he had just walked through. She felt oddly unsettled, as though the brief interaction had somehow made her day. Her heart was still racing, and she didn't understand why. He was just a stranger, after all. But the feeling stuck with her, and as she gathered her things to leave, she found herself still thinking about him. Emma couldn't shake the feeling of déjà vu when she walked into the grand hall of the event. The room was buzzing with conversations, a mix of industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and investors. She adjusted her blazer, taking a deep breath as she prepared herself for another long night of networking. After all, she was the financial consultant for the company hosting the event, and it was her job to ensure everything ran smoothly. But no matter how many times she rehearsed her introduction speeches or practiced her small talk, Emma's mind kept drifting back to the cafe, to the mysterious man who had left such an impression on her. Lucas Hayes. Was it just a coincidence? Emma kept asking herself. The man she'd met in the cafe, was he truly the same person standing here in front of her, attending a high-profile event that she herself was part of? The moment the thought crossed her mind, she quickly brushed it away, assuming it was just her imagination running wild. As she entered the hall, she was greeted by colleagues and clients, exchanging pleasantries and polite smiles. Her role at this event was straightforward: represent the financial team, answer any questions about the company's recent ventures, and, most importantly, impress potential investors with her knowledge of the market. However, as she made her way through the crowd, her eyes scanned the room for any sign of familiar faces. Then, just as if the universe had conspired, her gaze landed on him. There he was, Lucas Hayes. He was standing by the bar, talking to a small group of executives, his presence commanding attention even in the midst of the chatter. His dark suit, perfectly tailored, emphasized his sharp features and confident posture. His eyes were focused on the conversation, but when his gaze swept across the room, it landed on Emma. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow down. She stood there, frozen in place, until his eyes met hers again. This time, the connection was unmistakable. He didn't smile, didn't move, but the way he looked at her sent a jolt through her body. There was something magnetic about him, a quiet confidence that drew people in without a word. He walked over to her, his movements purposeful. The crowd parted slightly, as if they instinctively knew who he was. As he approached, Emma's heart rate quickened. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she couldn't deny the nervous excitement building within her. "Emma," he said, his voice smooth and familiar. "We meet again." Her throat went dry for a moment, but she managed a smile, trying to keep her composure. "Lucas," she replied, surprised at how calm she sounded. "I didn't expect to see you here. What brings you to our event?" "I could ask you the same," he said with a half smile. "But I suppose we both know why we're here." He gestured toward the stage where a speaker was preparing to present. "Business," Emma nodded, trying to stay focused. "Of course. It's a great opportunity to network and discuss new investments." There was a brief pause, Lucas took a step closer, his eyes not leaving hers. I didn't think I'd run into you again so soon. I didn't expect to see someone as intriguing as you in a room full of numbers and deals. Her breath hitched at his words. Emma wasn't sure whether he was being playful or serious, but there was a warmth to his tone that made her feel a little self-conscious. Was this just business banter, or something more? Well, I do love numbers, she said, trying to brush off the tension. But I must admit, meeting interesting people is always a nice break from all the spreadsheets and reports. Lucas chuckled, a soft, almost mischievous sound that made her feel slightly lighter. I suppose you're the one who makes all the numbers make sense, then. Something like that, Emma replied, her eyes narrowing playfully. I'm not the one running the company, but I like to think I help keep things in balance. The conversation flowed naturally after that, and for the first time since meeting him, Emma felt at ease. They talked about the company, their roles, and even the challenges the industry was facing. Emma was surprised at how much she enjoyed their conversation. Lucas was intelligent, insightful, and surprisingly open for someone with such an authoritative presence. And even though she was still wary of his intentions, there was an undeniable chemistry between them. At some point during their conversation, she realized she hadn't been paying attention to the time. She glanced down at her watch and saw that the event was winding down. She'd been talking to Lucas for much longer than she had planned. Well, I should let you get back to your duties, Lucas said, stepping back slightly. I'm sure you have a lot of people to talk to, but I'd like to continue our conversation sometime. Emma's pulse quickened. She wasn't sure if he was asking her out for coffee or just being polite, but the idea of talking to him again made her heart race. I'd like that, she said, her voice more confident than she felt. We should exchange contact information. A few minutes later, after parting ways with Lucas, Emma couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement and confusion. The man she had met only once in a cafe was now someone she would likely see more often in her professional circle. She didn't know what this meant, yet whether it was just business or something more, but one thing was certain. She couldn't stop thinking about him as she walked to the exit. She glanced back over her shoulder, but Lucas was already gone, swallowed by the crowd. She didn't know why, but she felt that this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. In fact, she was starting to wonder if fate had more in store for them than she had first imagined. The days following the business event were a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings, and financial reports for Emma. But despite the constant flurry of work, her mind kept drifting back to Lucas Hayes. The brief moments they'd shared at the event kept playing on a loop in her mind. His calm demeanor, the way he listened intently, and the way he spoke to her as if there was no one else in the room, it all felt too personal, too intimate for someone she had just met. She told herself it was just professional curiosity. After all, Lucas was a powerful CEO, and she was just a financial consultant in the industry. They had crossed paths because of work, and she shouldn't be reading too much into their interaction. Yet, despite her best efforts to focus on her tasks, she found herself looking for any excuse to reach out to him again. A few days later, Emma received an email from Lucasa. Surprise, given that they hadn't exchanged contact information beyond the event. The email was short and to the point, just as she had expected from someone in his position. Subject: follow-up on investment opportunity. Hi Emma. I wanted to follow up on our conversation at the event regarding the potential investment opportunities. I think there's a lot of potential for us to collaborate on this. I'd love to set up a time to discuss this in more detail. Would you be available for a meeting next week? Looking forward to hearing from you. Best regards, Lucas Hayes, CEO, Hayes Enterprises. Emma couldn't help but smile as she read the email. It was business, of course, but there was something about the way he phrased things that made it feel personal. Maybe it was just the natural charisma he exuded, or maybe she was reading too much into it. But either way, this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. She quickly typed a response, eager to keep the conversation going. Subject: re-follow-up on investment opportunity. Hi Lucas, thank you for reaching out. I'd love to meet and discuss the potential investment. I'm available next Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning, whichever works best for you. Looking forward to continuing our conversation. Best, Emma Sanders. A few days later, they met at a sleek, modern cafe in the heart of the city. The location was ideal, quiet, professional, but relaxed enough to foster a good conversation. Lucas arrived on time, as always, dressed in a sharp suit that made him look both approachable and commanding. His presence was magnetic, and as soon as he walked in, Emma felt the familiar pull she couldn't ignore. Emma, Lucas greeted her with a warm smile, his tone as confident as ever. He extended his hand, and she shook it firmly, surprised by the strength in his grip. It's good to see you again. You too, Emma said, trying to hide the flutter in her chest. I'm glad we could set this up. As they sat down and ordered coffee, the conversation quickly turned to business. They discussed the investment opportunity in great detail, with Emma providing her insights and Lucas sharing his vision for the future of the project. Despite the business-focused dialogue, Emma couldn't help but notice how Lucas's eyes occasionally lingered on her more than was necessary for a professional discussion. As the meeting progressed, Emma found herself more and more at ease in his company. It was easy to talk to him, easy to connect with him. He wasn't just a CEO. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone of his stature. There were moments when their conversation strayed from business, and she found herself laughing at his dry humor or getting lost in his stories about life before becoming a CEO at one point. As they discussed a potential partnership, Lucas leaned back in his chair and looked at her thoughtfully. You know, Emma, you're a lot more than I expected, he said, his voice softening just a bit. I've worked with a lot of consultants, but you have a way of seeing things that most don't. Emma blinked, taken aback by the compliment. She wasn't used to hearing praise like that from someone of his caliber. Thank you, she said, a little flustered. I've worked hard to get where I am, but there's always more to learn. Lucas nodded, his gaze intense yet kind. That's what I like about you. You're humble, but you know your stuff. There was a brief silence between them as the weight of his words lingered. For a moment, Emma forgot that this was just a business meeting. The way he looked at her made her feel like they were the only two people in the room. As the meeting came to a close, Lucas stood up and extended his hand once more. I'm glad we had the chance to meet, he said with a smile. I think we can make this work. I'll be in touch soon. Emma shook his hand again, her heart racing in her chest. I agree. I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes. Walking out of the cafe, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that things were shifting between them. It wasn't just business anymore, it felt personal. She didn't know how to process the emotions swirling inside her. Was she attracted to him? Or was it just his confidence and power that drew her in? No matter what, Emma couldn't deny that she was starting to feel something she hadn't expected. A connection. Something that went beyond numbers and contracts. Later that evening, After reviewing her notes from the meeting, Emma found herself texting her best friend, Lily. So, I met him. Lucas Hayes, the CEO from the event. He's just as intriguing as I remember. Actually, ... Maybe more. A few seconds later, Lily replied, "Oh, spill the details. Is he as charming as everyone says?" Emma stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of how to answer. There was a lot she could say, but it felt different this time. She didn't want to jump to conclusions. Instead, she typed, "He's complicated, but there's something about him. Not just the business side, but something else." She hit send and stared at the message. Maybe she was reading too much into it. After all, he was a CEO. She was just a financial consultant. Nothing was going to come of it, right? The days after their meeting felt strange. Emma had spent years learning to keep her professional and personal lives separate. But there was something about Lucas Hayes that was impossible to ignore. Every email exchange, every brief conversation made her heart beat just a little faster, made her think just a little harder about what was going on between them. Emma had tried to push it all to the back of her mind, focusing on the upcoming investment deal they were both working on. But the more they worked together, the more those lines between business and personal seemed to blur. It was Thursday afternoon, and Emma was finishing up some paperwork in her office when she received a message from Lucas. "Hey Emma, I know we're both busy with the deal, but I think we should discuss a few things in person. Would you be available for dinner tonight? Let's talk strategy and where we go from here." She stared at the message for a moment. Dinner, business, over dinner. The rational part of her mind told her it was just a professional meeting. But another part, one she couldn't deny, was excited. She hesitated for a few seconds, then typed her response. "Dinner sounds good. I'm free after 7 p.m. Let's meet at the Gallery restaurant." Lucas replied almost instantly, "Perfect. See you then." Later that evening, Emma arrived at the restaurant, a classy place known for its high-end cuisine and its quiet, intimate ambience. The dim lighting and soft music created a perfect atmosphere for what was supposed to be a straightforward business discussion. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this dinner would be more than just that. As she walked into the restaurant, her eyes immediately found Lucas. He was already sitting at a corner table, his broad shoulders set against the sleek leather chair, his eyes scanning the menu. He looked up as she approached, his lips curving into that familiar half-smile that made her stomach flutter. "Emma, you look stunning," he said, standing up as she reached the table. "Thank you," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The compliment, combined with his proximity, was making her heart race faster than she cared to admit. She sat down opposite him, and the waiter arrived with the menus. They ordered drinks and got right to business, discussing the finer points of the investment deal they were working on. But as the conversation continued, Emma couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in Lucas's demeanor. His professional mask slipped ever so slightly, his gaze lingering on her for a beat too long. She felt the tension build between them, thick and palpable. The business talk became secondary to the magnetic pull she felt in the air, the unspoken words that hung between them. Halfway through dinner, Lucas finally set his fork down and looked at Emma with a seriousness that made her pulse quicken. "Emma," he began, his voice lower than usual, "I've been thinking a lot about our conversations, about the deal and everything we've been working on. But honestly, I can't stop thinking about you." The words hit Emma like a wave, unexpected and overwhelming. She stared at him, unsure of how to respond. This was business dinner, wasn't it? Why was he suddenly bringing up personal feelings? Emma started to speak, but Lucas raised a hand, stopping her. I know this may seem sudden, but it's not just about the deal anymore, he continued, his eyes intense. I'm trying to keep this professional, but I can't ignore the fact that... There's something between us. I've felt it since that first time we met. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. Was this really happening? She had been thinking the same thing, but hearing him say it aloud felt like stepping off a cliff, knowing there was no way back. I can't deny it either, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know where this is going, Lucas. We work together. This could complicate everything. Lucas leaned forward slightly, his tone soft but earnest. I know the risks, Emma, but sometimes you can't control where life takes you. I didn't expect to feel this way about you, but now that I do, I can't just pretend it's not there. For a moment, there was silence between them. Emma's mind was spinning. She had been taught to keep emotions out of the workplace, to avoid any personal entanglements. But here she was, sitting across from one of the most powerful men she knew, feeling a pull she couldn't explain. Breaking the silence, Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Lucas, she stopped herself, realizing that words alone wouldn't do justice to what she was feeling. She looked at him, searching his eyes for any sign that this wasn't just some fleeting moment, but something real. I don't want to complicate things. I don't want to regret this. Lucas reached out, placing his hand on top of hers. The touch was warm, grounding. I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight, Emma, but I do think we owe it to ourselves to explore this, whatever this is. We can still keep the business separate, but we need to be honest with each other about where we stand. The sincerity in his voice made Emma's heart ache. She wasn't sure where this would go, but she knew she didn't want to walk away without giving it a chance. After dinner, as the evening came to a close, Emma and Lucas stood outside the restaurant, the cool evening air brushing against their faces. They said little as they walked to their cars, the quiet between them filled with unspoken understanding. Neither of them knew exactly what came next, but they both knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. Good night. Emma, Lucas said softly as he opened the door to his car. Good night, Lucas, Emma replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. As she drove home, Emma couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. She knew she couldn't go back to the way things were before. What started as a business partnership had now evolved into something far more complicated, and the line between personal and professional had officially blurred. The following days were a whirlwind of mixed emotions for Emma Sanders. The dinner with Lucas Hayes had left her feeling both exhilarated and terrified. On one hand, she couldn't deny the chemistry between them, but on the other hand, their professional relationship was becoming more and more entangled with personal feelings, and Emma wasn't sure if she could handle the complexity at work. Everything seemed to continue as usual. Emma attended meetings, updated reports, and kept her focus on the ongoing investment project that she and Lucas were working on. Yet, each time they exchanged emails or shared a conversation, a part of her couldn't help but think about their last encounter. It was like trying to ignore an elephant in the room. The attraction between them was undeniable, but they still had to function professionally. That morning, as Emma walked into the office, she was greeted with a slew of emails and calls to catch up on. There was one from Lucas among them. Subject: meeting tomorrow. Hi Emma. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other night. I know we're both under a lot of pressure with the deal, but I think it's time we discuss how we're going to move forward, both professionally and personally. How about we meet tomorrow to talk about this? Best, Lucas, her heart skipped a beat as she read his message. He was right. There was no avoiding this anymore. They couldn't keep pretending that the personal connection didn't exist, especially when they were already working so closely together. Emma quickly typed a response. Subject meeting. Tomorrow, hi Lucas, I agree that we need to talk. Tomorrow works for me. Let's meet at 2 p.m. in my office to discuss both the deal and how we move forward with everything else. Looking forward to it. Emma. The rest of the day dragged by slowly for Emma. She couldn't stop thinking about what the conversation with Lucas might lead to. What would they say? How would they balance their growing feelings with the need to keep their business relationship intact? Would they be able to make this work, or was it too complicated? 2 p.m. the next day, Emma stood at the window of her office, waiting for Lucas to arrive. The weight of the decision they were about to make hung heavy in the air. She had spent the morning going over the details of the investment deal, and she knew they were close to finalizing everything. But now, it was no longer just about numbers and projections. It was about their personal connection and how that would affect their work. As the clock ticked closer to 2, she felt her stomach flutter with nerves. When the knock came at the door, she took a deep breath and opened it. Lucas, she greeted him with a warm smile, though her heart was racing. Come in, Emma, he replied, his gaze intense but calm as always. He stepped into the room, and for a moment, the distance between them felt palpable. He was wearing a dark suit, and the air of authority he carried was as strong as ever. But today, there was something different in his expression. He seemed ... softer, more vulnerable, maybe. He closed the door behind him and took a seat across from her. I think it's time we clear the air, he said, leaning forward slightly, his eyes not leaving hers. Emma nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I agree. The conversation began with business, as they reviewed the final details of their investment deal. They went over the projections, the potential risks, and the next steps to take. As usual, Emma's analytical mind guided the discussion. But Lucas was just as engaged, contributing his insights and suggestions. Despite their personal tension, they were still an excellent team when it came to work. But it wasn't long before the conversation shifted to more personal matters. Emma, Lucas began, his voice more serious now. I know we've been dancing around this for a while, but I think we need to address it head on. What happened between us the other night, ... It wasn't just about the deal, and I don't want to ignore it anymore. Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She had known this conversation was coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to respond. Lucas, she said, her voice steady despite the swirl of emotions inside her, I don't want to complicate things. We've both worked hard to get where we are, and I value our professional relationship. But you feel it too, don't you? Lucas interrupted, his gaze never wavering. This ... connection. It's not just physical. I know it's not just about the business. We've crossed a line, Emma, and I want to know where we go from here. Emma took a deep breath, looking out the window for a moment to collect her thoughts. When she turned back to face him, her eyes met his, and she knew she couldn't lie to him anymore. The feelings were there, undeniable, raw and complicated. I do feel it, she admitted quietly, but I don't know how to handle it. We're in a delicate position, Lucas. If we let our personal feelings get in the way of the deal, Everything we've worked for could fall apart. I don't want to lose everything we've built either, Lucas said, his tone softer. But I also don't want to pretend this isn't happening. I can't keep working with you day in and day out without acknowledging how much I care about you. I need to know if we can move forward with this SIF. We can make it work. Despite the risks, there was a long silence between them as Emma processed his words. She felt torn, her mind racing with the possibilities and the consequences. Lucas was right, they couldn't ignore their feelings, but they couldn't let it destroy their careers either. Lucas, she said, her voice more determined, I don't want to lose what we have personally or professionally, but we need to figure out a way to keep our work separate from this. If we can't do that, we're setting ourselves up for failure. He nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of what she was saying. I agree. We'll figure it out. But I think we owe it to ourselves to give this a chance, to see if we can make it work, together. Later that evening, after their meeting, Emma sat at her desk, replaying their conversation in her head. Lucas had made it clear that he was serious, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that they both had something to lose. Their relationship, whatever it was fragile, and they both had to tread carefully. She wasn't sure where this would lead. But one thing was certain. The lines between personal and professional had officially blurred. The question now was, could they find a way to balance both without destroying what they had worked so hard to build? The following weeks were a blur for Emma Sanders. She had never been someone who mixed business with personal life, and yet here she was, struggling to keep the two worlds from colliding. The investment deal they were working on with Lucas Hayes was reaching its final stages, and Emma was focused on making sure everything went smoothly. But each meeting with him, each exchange of glances, made it harder and harder to ignore the growing attraction between them. They had agreed, for the sake of their professional lives, to keep their feelings in check. But the more time they spent together, the harder it became to separate the personal from the business. It was a Friday afternoon, and Emma was reviewing the final reports for the investment deal in her office when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw it was a message from Lucas. Hey Emma, I know things are getting tense with the deal. How about we grab a drink tonight to unwind? I think we both need a break. Her first instinct was to ignore it. They had already agreed to keep their personal feelings separate. But the thought of seeing him again, of spending time with him outside of work, was tempting. She had to admit, the tension between them was undeniable, and it had started to seep into her every waking thought. Sounds good, she typed back, before pausing for a moment. Then, she added, but just one drink. I have an early meeting tomorrow. A moment later, he replied, one drink it is. I'll pick you up at 7. Emma set her phone down with a sigh. She wasn't sure what was driving her to agree to this, but there was something about Lucas that she couldn't resist. Maybe it was the way he made her feel seen, understood. Or maybe it was the magnetic pull between them that had been there from the moment they first met, that night. Emma stood in front of her closet, trying to decide what to wear. The idea of spending time with Lucas, outside of the office, made her feel a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She didn't want to dress too casually, but she also didn't want to appear like she was trying too hard. In the end, she settled on a simple, sleek black dress with a pair of low heels, just enough to feel confident, but not too much to send the wrong message. When Lucas arrived to pick her up, he was dressed in a tailored suit, his tie slightly loosened. His appearance was polished, as always, but there was a certain warmth in his demeanor tonight. He looked at her with a smile that was both soft and knowing, as though he understood the tension between them. "You look amazing," he said as she got into the car. "Thank you," Emma replied, feeling a little flushed under his gaze. "You look pretty good yourself." They both laughed, the air between them feeling lighter than it had in days. As Lucas drove them to a trendy bar downtown, they chatted about the usual things, the weather, the latest industry news, but there was an underlying current to their conversation that neither of them could ignore. At the bar, they sat down at a quiet table in the corner. The dim lighting and relaxed atmosphere made it feel like they were in a different world, away from the pressures of the office. Emma took a sip of her wine, glancing at Lucas over the rim of her glass. "So, what's really going on, Lucas?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "I know we've been talking about business, but I feel like there's more to this than just the deal." Lucas looked at her, his gaze steady but intense. "You're right," he said quietly. "There's more to this, more to us. I can't keep pretending that I'm just focused on business, when it's clear that I'm thinking about you more than I should be." Emma's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment she had been both dreading and hoping for, the moment when they would have to confront the feelings they had been avoiding. "Lucas, we can't do this," she said, her voice shaky but firm. "We agreed that we wouldn't mix business with personal. We can't let this complicate everything we've worked for." He reached across the table, his hand brushing hers lightly. "I know, Emma, but I can't ignore this anymore. I can't keep pretending I don't care about you, and I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. I just want you to know how I feel." Emma stared at their hands, her pulse racing. She had always been the pragmatic one, the one who kept her emotions in check, but with Lucas, it was different. His words, his touch, they were like a magnet pulling her closer. She wanted to fight it, but she couldn't. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to risk everything for something I'm not sure about. But at the same time, I can't ignore what's between us." After a few moments of silence, Lucas finally spoke again, his voice calm but full of conviction. "We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just need to be honest with each other. I'm willing to take the risk. Emma, I want to see where this goes, whether it's business or something more." Emma felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She had always been the one to play it safe, to avoid complications. But in that moment, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was time to take a chance, to let go of the fear that had always held her back. "Okay," she said quietly, looking up at him. "But we need to keep our heads straight. We can't let this jeopardize everything we've worked for." Lucas nodded, a small, relieved smile forming on his face. "Agreed. We'll take it one step at a time." The rest of the evening was spent talking and laughing, the conversation flowing freely as the barriers between them began to fade. By the time they left the bar, Emma felt lighter, more at ease than she had in days. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path. Later that night, as Emma lay in bed, her mind replaying the events of the evening, she realized that something had changed. The lines between personal and professional were no longer clear, and she wasn't sure how to navigate the uncertainty that came with it. But one thing was certain: Lucas Hayes had become a part of her life in a way she never expected. The days following their heart-to-heart conversation felt different. There was a quiet shift between Emma Sanders and Lucas Hayes. despite their agreement to take things slowly, to separate their personal feelings from their professional responsibilities. Neither of them could ignore the tension that had begun to grow at work. They continued to meet and strategize about the investment deal they had been working on for weeks. Emma had always prided herself on her professionalism and ability to keep emotions at bay in the workplace. But Lucas's presence was becoming more difficult to ignore. Every email they exchanged, every time they were in the same room, the lines between business and something more personal became blurrier. One Friday morning, Emma sat at her desk, reviewing the final details of the deal with her team. She tried to keep her mind focused on the numbers, but all she could think about was Lucas, the way he'd looked at her when they had agreed to take things slow. The warmth in his voice when he said he wanted to see where this could go lingered in her mind, distracting her from the task at hand. Just as she was about to call it a day, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Lucas. "Can we meet later today? There's something important I need to discuss with you." Emma felt her pulse quicken at the message. The last time they had met outside of work, things had felt different, intimate, charged with something more than just business. She couldn't deny the curiosity gnawing at her. She quickly typed back, "Sure, I'm free at 5, same place." "Perfect. See you then." At 5 p.m., Emma arrived at their usual cafe, the place where they had first met. It felt like the right location for a conversation that wasn't just about work. When she walked in, she saw Lucas already waiting, leaning casually against the counter, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. His expression softened as he saw her, and for a moment, everything around them seemed to fade away. It wasn't just the CEO, the powerful businessman who commanded attention. It was Lucas, the man she had been thinking about more than she was willing to admit. "Hey," he said softly as she approached, standing up straight. "Hey," Emma replied, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "What's going on?" He motioned toward the table in the corner. "Let's sit down and talk. It's not just about the deal anymore." As they sat across from each other, Emma couldn't ignore the tension between them. There was something different in the way Lucas was looking at her, like he was seeing her for the first time, not as a colleague, but as someone he wanted to understand more deeply. "I know we agreed to take things slow," Lucas began, his voice low and steady, "but I can't keep pretending that what's happening between us isn't affecting me. I've been trying to focus on the deal, but every time we meet, it's like my mind goes somewhere else. I've been thinking about you a lot, Emma." Emma felt her heart skip a beat. She had been trying so hard to compartmentalize her feelings, but now that Lucas had acknowledged it, it felt impossible to ignore anymore. "Lucas," she said, her voice quiet, "I don't want to make things complicated. We've worked so hard to get to this point in our careers, and I'm afraid that if we let this ... double quotes, she trailed off, not sure how to put it into words ... if we let this personal thing get in the way, it could ruin everything." He leaned in slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I get it. I'm not asking you to change everything overnight, but I can't ignore how I feel. And I know you feel it too." Emma felt a wave of conflicting emotions flood her. She had spent so long keeping her feelings in check, telling herself that they were just colleagues, just professionals. But now, with Lucas sitting across from her, looking at her with that same intensity, she couldn't pretend anymore. "I don't know what to do," she confessed, her voice shaking slightly. "Part of me wants to give this a chance, but another part of me is terrified of the consequences." I've worked so hard to build my career, and I don't want to lose everything because of a moment of weakness. Lucas's expression softened. I'm not asking you to throw everything away, but I think we both owe it to ourselves to see where this can go, without worrying about what might happen if things go wrong. The weight of his words hung in the air, and Emma sat there, thinking, processing. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what this might become, but she knew that she couldn't keep pretending that this wasn't real. I think I need more time, she said quietly, her hands resting on the table. I need to figure out what I want from this, what we both want. Lucas nodded, his expression understanding. I'm not rushing you, Emma. Take all the time you need. But just know, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Later that evening, as Emma walked home, her mind was spinning. She had told herself that she needed to focus on her career, that relationships could wait. But now, Lucas had forced her to confront the feelings she'd been trying so hard to suppress. What would happen if they pursued this? Would it complicate everything? Or would it make them both stronger? She didn't have the answers yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life, and her relationship with Lucas, was about to change forever. The days following their conversation felt like a careful balancing act. Emma Sanders was trying to manage the growing tension between her professional life and the undeniable attraction she felt for Lucas Hayes. They had agreed to take things slow, but each interaction felt more complicated than the last. Every email, every meeting, every conversation carried an undercurrent of something personal that they had yet to fully address. It was a Monday morning, when the stress of it all really hit Emma. The final stages of the investment deal were underway, and everything was moving at lightning speed. Her team had been working round the clock to ensure that all the financial details were in place. But as she sat in the conference room, listening to the proposals, her mind kept wandering back to the conversation she had had with Lucas. I think we owe it to ourselves to see where this can go. His words echoed in her mind. It was hard to focus. The deal was important, and Emma knew how much Lucas was counting on her expertise. But the more they worked together, the more complicated everything felt. She couldn't ignore the pull between them, and it made her question everything: her career, her priorities, and what she truly wanted from this relationship. As the meeting concluded, Emma felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. She excused herself quickly, telling her team she had to make a few calls. She stepped out of the room and found a quiet corner in the hallway to collect her thoughts. Lucas had been noticeably distant the last few days. Although they had agreed to keep things professional, she couldn't help but wonder if he was sensing her hesitation. Was he pulling back too? Or was it just her overthinking everything? She needed clarity, and the only person who could provide it was Lucas. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her phone and sent him a quick message. Lucas, we need to talk. Minutes later, her phone buzzed with his reply. Meet me at the rooftop garden after work. I think we both need to clear the air. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had known this conversation was coming, but it still felt surreal. She had to face it, she told herself. She couldn't keep avoiding the inevitable. 5 p.m., and Emma made her way to the rooftop garden of their office building. It was a quiet space, with beautiful views of the city skyline. A perfect place for a conversation that would inevitably change everything. When she arrived, she saw Lucas already standing there, looking out over the city. His posture was relaxed, but Emma could see the tension in the way he held himself. He had a way of appearing calm on the outside, but she knew him well enough by now to see through the surface. Emma, he greeted her softly, turning to face her. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course," she replied, her voice steady despite the racing thoughts in her mind. She took a step closer, unsure of how to start. "I don't want to complicate things more than they already are," Emma began, her voice quieter than usual. "But I think we need to have a serious talk about ... everything. About us." Lucas nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I know, I've been thinking about it too. I can't keep pretending that I don't feel something for you, Emma. But I understand if this is something you don't want to pursue. I don't want to risk our professional relationship, and I certainly don't want to make things harder for you." The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. She had always seen Lucas as the confident CEO who had everything figured out. But in that moment, he seemed as uncertain as she felt. There was a long silence between them, both of them struggling to find the right words. Emma looked out over the city, her mind racing. She had spent so much time focused on her career, so much time trying to keep her emotions in check, that she hadn't stopped to ask herself what she truly wanted. When she finally spoke again, her voice was firm but soft. "Lucas, I don't want to lose everything we've worked for, but I also can't ignore what I'm feeling. I don't know what this is between us, but it's real, and I think we need to decide if it's worth the risk." He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "I'm willing to take the risk, Emma, but I need to know that you're on the same page. We can't keep pretending this isn't happening." In that moment, Emma realized something. She had spent so much time running from her feelings, from the fear of what could happen if things went wrong, that she had forgotten to ask herself if this was something worth fighting for. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of what this could mean for my career, for my life. But I also know that I can't keep ignoring you, Lucas. I think I want to give this a chance." Lucas's face softened with relief, and for the first time in a long while, Emma saw him as just a man, someone who was vulnerable, just like her. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "We'll take it one step at a time, Emma. No pressure, no rush. But I'm glad we're finally being honest with each other." The weight of the decision hung heavy between them, but Emma felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt before. The uncertainty hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt as overwhelming. She had made a decision, one that would change the course of her life and career. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to embrace whatever came next. Later that evening, after their conversation, Emma returned to her apartment. The city lights sparkled outside her window, but she couldn't stop thinking about Lucas, about the future they were now building together, despite the risks. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be challenges along the way. But for the first time, Emma felt like she was moving towards something real. The weeks that followed their conversation on the rooftop garden felt like a constant balancing act for Emma Sanders. She and Lucas Hayes had agreed to take things slow, to focus on their work and not let their personal relationship interfere with their professional lives. But the more time they spent together, the harder it became to keep those lines clearly defined. The investment deal they were working on was finally coming to a close, but the pressure was mounting. As the CEO of his company, Lucas had his own set of responsibilities, and Emma's role as the consultant was equally demanding. The more they tried to maintain their professional boundaries, the more they found themselves drawn into each other's worlds, both personally and professionally. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Emma was reviewing the final proposals for the deal in her office when she received a call from Lucas. She had been expecting it. He had been in and out of meetings all day, just like her. But something in the tone of his voice made her heart race. "Hey, Emma," Lucas said, his voice tight with frustration. "We need to talk. Can you come to my office? I think we need to have a serious conversation about the deal." Emma's stomach tightened. She could hear the weight of his words, and she knew this was more than just business. It was about them, about the tension they had been trying to ignore for weeks. "Okay," she said, trying to sound calm, even though she was starting to feel uneasy. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. When she arrived at Lucas's office, he was standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline. His suit was perfectly tailored, but there was a heaviness in his posture that made her heart ache. Emma walked in quietly, unsure of what to say. She had hoped that things would get easier, that they would figure out a way to balance everything. But now it felt like they were at a breaking point. "Emma," Lucas said, turning to face her. His face was hard, his jaw clenched. "We can't keep doing this. We can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's clear that we're both struggling. The deal is important, yes, but it's not just about that anymore." Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. "What do you mean? I thought we agreed to keep things professional." The deal is fine," Lucas interrupted, stepping closer to her. "But I'm not fine, Emma. And I know you're not either. We can't keep pretending that we're just colleagues, that we don't feel what we feel. It's not fair to either of us." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She had known this conversation was coming, but now that it was happening, she wasn't sure what to say. She had spent so much time trying to keep her emotions in check, but now she realized that she had been fooling herself. She cared about him, more than she was willing to admit. "I don't want to lose everything we've worked for." "Lucas," she said, her voice shaking, "this deal is everything for us. It's everything for both of our careers." Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want to lose everything either, Emma, but I can't keep going like this. I can't keep pretending that I'm not falling for you, that I don't want something more with you. I'm trying to hold it together, but it's getting harder every day." For a moment, there was silence between them, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She had known this was coming, but she hadn't expected it to be so raw, so intense. She had spent so much of her life focused on her career, trying to control everything. But Lucas had forced her to confront something she wasn't ready to face. "I don't know what to do," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so afraid of losing control, of letting this get in the way of everything we've worked for. But at the same time, ... double quotes, searching for the right words. At the same time, I can't ignore how I feel." Lucas reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The touch was warm and grounding, and Emma felt a wave of emotions rush through her. She wanted to pull away, to keep everything in control, but something inside her knew that it was time to face the truth. "We don't have to have all the answers right now," Lucas said softly. "But we can't keep avoiding this. We can't keep pretending that it doesn't matter. I want to be with you, Emma. I'm willing to take the risk. Are you?" Emma looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she didn't see the powerful CEO. She saw Lucas, vulnerable, uncertain, and willing to take a chance. It was terrifying, and yet, in that moment, it felt like the right thing to do. "I want to be with you too," she whispered. "But I don't know if I can handle the fallout. What if this ruins everything? We'll figure it out, Lucas said, his voice filled with conviction. We'll take it one step at a time. We don't have to rush into anything, but we can't keep ignoring what's real between us. We owe it to ourselves to see where this goes. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Emma and Lucas continued working on the deal, but there was a noticeable shift in their dynamic. Every glance, every touch, every word seemed charged with something more than just business. They were walking a tightrope, trying to maintain professionalism while navigating their growing feelings for each other. Emma found herself torn. She wanted to believe that they could make it work, that they could find a way to balance their personal and professional lives, but she knew that wasn't going to be easy. The pressure was mounting from all sides, and she couldn't shake the feeling that one wrong move could unravel everything. That Thursday, as Emma sat in her office, she received an email from Lucas. Subject: a step forward, Maha. I know things are complicated right now, but I think we need to take a step forward. I want to talk about this, to figure out how we can make this work. I know there's a lot at stake, but I believe in us. Let's meet tomorrow, just the two of us. We'll talk about the deal and ... Everything else. Lucas Seema stared at the screen, her heart racing. She knew this was the moment of truth, the moment where they would either choose to face the future together or let the pressure of their situation pull them apart. The night was still, the city lights sparkling in the distance as Emma Sanders stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out over the skyline. It had been a few days since she and Lucas Hayes had sat down together to talk about the future. The conversation they had shared had been honest, raw, and uncertain, but it was a turning point. It was the moment they both acknowledged that their feelings for each other were no longer something they could ignore. Now, Emma was standing at the edge of a decision. The final stages of the investment deal were about to be completed, and their professional lives had been intertwined for months. But more than that, their personal connection had deepened in ways that neither of them had expected. She knew the risks. There was no guarantee that this would work. But sometimes, the heart had to take risks to find something real. The next morning, Emma arrived at the office early, determined to finish the last details of the deal. As she walked through the halls, she felt a sense of finality. The deal was almost done, and after all the work, the sleepless nights, the strategy meetings, it was now at its conclusion. But what lay ahead for her and Lucas? Could they keep their professional lives intact while exploring their feelings for each other? She hadn't had the chance to talk to him yet, but she knew that their next conversation would change everything. At 3 p.m., as Emma was putting the final touches on the report, she received a message from Lucas. Emma, can you meet me at the rooftop garden in 30 minutes? It's time we talk about what comes next. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. This wasn't just about the deal anymore. This was about them. Everything they had worked through, the emotions they had both pushed to the side, the risks they were willing to take, it all came down to this moment. She quickly responded, I'll be there. When Emma arrived at the rooftop garden, Lucas was already there, waiting by the railing, looking out at the city. The same serene yet intense expression was on his face, but today there was a softness to his gaze that made her feel like they had come full circle. Lucas, Emma said, her voice steady but her heart pounding. I think we both know why we're here. He turned to face her, and for the first time there was no hesitation in his eyes. Yes, he replied, his voice calm, but with an underlying sense of urgency. We've been walking around this for weeks. Emma, I don't want to waste any more time pretending that what we feel for each other isn't real. The deal, our careers, they matter, but you matter to me, too. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She had spent so much time protecting herself, keeping her distance from the things that could hurt her. But now, standing in front of Lucas, she realized that some things were worth the risk. "Lucas," she began, her voice softer, "I've spent so long focusing on my career, on doing everything perfectly. I've always been in control, always certain of my path. But with you, I don't have all the answers. I don't know what comes next for us. But I do know this. I don't want to walk away from you. Not now. Not ever." Lucas stepped forward, closing the space between them. "Emma," he said, his voice low and sincere, "I don't have all the answers either. But I know that I want to try. I want to see where this goes, not just as business partners, but as something more, something real. And if it means taking risks, then I'm ready." In that moment, Emma knew what she had to do. She had to let go of the fear, the doubts, the need for control. She had to trust both her heart and her instincts. There was no perfect time, no perfect solution. There was only now. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she held it in her own. "Let's take it one step at a time, Lucas," she said, her voice stronger now. "Let's see where this journey takes us." Over the next few weeks, the investment deal was finalized successfully, and Emma and Lucas began navigating their relationship with a new understanding. They continued to work together, their professional lives intertwined in a way that felt natural, not forced. They learned to communicate openly about their feelings and the challenges that came with balancing their personal and professional worlds. As they moved forward, the risks they took together, both in business and in love, became the foundation for their future. It wasn't easy, but it was real. And for Emma, that was enough. A few months later, as Emma stood in front of a conference room, preparing for another big presentation, she glanced over at Lucas, who was sitting in the front row, watching her with that same unwavering support. They had come a long way since that first meeting. Since that fateful night on the rooftop, their careers were thriving, their partnership stronger than ever, and their relationship, personal and professional, had become the most important thing in their lives. As she finished her presentation, Emma felt a sense of pride and fulfillment, not just in her work, but in her life, in the love she had found with Lucas, the risks they had taken together, and the future they were building, one step at a time. When the meeting ended, Lucas approached her, a smile tugging at his lips. "You were incredible," he said softly, his hand resting on the small of her back. Emma smiled, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you." And with that, they walked out of the room together, ready to face whatever came next.